Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for being with us. It's such an honor to have you on our podcast.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit. I'm very interested in how you got started in this topic and understanding more about work and the nature of work and the psychology of it.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist. So I spent years as a college professor teaching at colleges and universities. And then I decided to leave academics and join the corporate world. And I became a pollster. So I'm very interested in research like you.
Yeah.
And so my job was to measure public opinion, figure out what people believe, and then advise organizations on how they can shift those opinions using psychological insights. And in being a pollster, I had to work within many corporate settings. And one of the things that I realized, not having at all expected it, was just the divide between the research and the practical world. How so many of the insights that we as researchers have uncovered about creativity and productivity and success, most of them were just not being applied at many organizations. And so I decided I was going to quit my job, write a book where I translated a ton of research into actionable strategies, and that became the best place to work.
I love it. I bought the book of my own accord, read it front to back, love it. I am a nerd. But it was so good because one of the things that I always find interesting is, as a researcher and as someone who is always asking why, is first I wonder about that, and then I think, well, you have the information, why aren't you doing it? So what do you see as that being one of the big barriers of why people have a hard time getting these, great things that they know they could be doing to help their employees into action in their companies? What happens?
Well, I don't think that it's because they know the insights and they're not using them. I think it's more the case of most of this research is just hidden in academic journals, sitting in libraries, accumulating dust.
Yeah.
And if you're a leader, you're busy. You don't have time to read academic journal articles. And even if you did, they're written for other academics.
Right.
And so becomes really tricky. And so my job, I think I was kind of uniquely positioned because I'd worked as a consultant, and I realized that the entire deck that you put together, the thing that people are most interested in are the actionable recommendations on the last page. And so I thought, what if I wrote a book as just the last page, but just over 300 pages of last pages? And that's what I tried to do here. And so I think a big part of it is people don't know. And to the extent that they may have heard some of these things, like, for example, you might have heard about, we should reward failure. And that sounds great for the Silicon Valley companies, but that's just completely impractical. How am I supposed to do that? And so knowing about some of that research and having some practical strategies around it and knowing why it helps, I think lends value, because I think in many cases, organizations assume that if they start implementing some of these things that make people happy, that means their employees are not going to work as hard and they're not going to be less profitable. And so what I make the case in this book, The Best Place to Work, is that there is a direct link between how happy your employees are and how profitable you are. And so applying some of these strategies is really critical to not just elevating everyone's performance, but actually improving your company's success.
Yeah, that's so key, is to make sure that the companies understand the benefit of happy, engaged employees.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear you saying that it improves profit, but what are some of the other reasons why, whomever is listening right now should care about making sure that their employees are maybe, having autonomy or well rested, or these things that you advocate for? Why should they want to do that?
Well, if you are trying to decrease turnover, that's one factor.
Yeah.
Another factor is reducing burnout. That's another key factor. And frankly, getting people to be creative and innovative, that is a skill. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you can just simply hire for, because even if you have the most creative people in the world, if you put them in a corporate setting where they feel like unless they have the right answers, they feel incredibly pressured, or if they have to go along with what the leader says, all of those factors can undermine creativity. So knowing how to get the most out of people is a learnable skill. And that's what this research and this science is all about, is how do we get the best out of people to improve not just our profits, but also elevate everyone's quality of life.
I love that. Let's spread the good news everywhere, right? Everyone needs to hear this. I know for our industry in particular, one of the things that we've really struggled with is burnout. Mm-hmm. Through the pandemic, the people who were in the property offices and the apartment management offices on site were considered frontline employees. So they really weren't able to work from home, no time off, often, exposed over and over again. And then there was really a loss of staffing, a ton of turnover. And now it seems like lots of our folks are just exhausted and really burned out. What would you tell our industry? Like what what's the first aid? What do you do right now to try to help when maybe you don't have the numbers that you need for staffing, or you haven't been able to bounce back yet? They're still really in recovery. What should they do first?
Well, you guys are a research firm. I'm a researcher. Obviously, the answer is going to be research. So I feel like you need to poll the people who are there to understand what it is that's going on for them in terms of their daily experience. I also think there's value in interviewing in a systematic way the people who've left and uncovering the reasons why they left. And I think if you can capture both of those things, you can start to triangulate around strategies for both attracting new employees and then helping the employees who are there improve their daily experience. So I really do feel like I think burnout has become such a catchphrase for just general disengagement or dislike of work. And I think it really is a lot more nuanced than that. There are different reasons that are contributing in different organizations. So to just say, hey, we want to eliminate burnout, we therefore just need to give people more time off, or that actually can backfire. When you reward people with time off, it suggests that work is punitive. It's a penalty. And so rewarding people with time off actually can backfire. And so it really is going to be different for every organization. And so if you want to have a smart answer to that question, you really need to get clearer on what are the factors that are contributing to people's burnout before you can begin to address it.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating to think that, we need to ask and find out and then figure out what to do. And the idea of not just an exit interview, but finding out why people left or maybe what they wouldn't have said to you when they were your employee, it can be such valuable information.
And I think if you present it in a particular way, it can also lead people to feel appreciated just by the very fact that you're asking. It's all about how it's presented as a factor that we're really interested in. We want your help and we want your advice on how to make this the best possible workplace. If you frame it that way, I think it's very different than please complete our annual survey.
Yes, of course.
So there's a way of communicating in a way where people will feel valued just because you're asking them.
So I'm hearing that we need to make sure that we help people feel valued and that, they have, I hate saying work-life balance because I feel like it's such a throwaway term, almost like burnout at this point. So what are the other things we need to do to make sure we can help have a great place to work?
Yeah, so what it comes down to when you look at the research on what is it that makes work most satisfying for people, it really comes down to three key factors. And they're within research that we call them these psychological needs. The psychological needs are, number one, the need for mastery or competence is how it's termed in the research. What mastery refers to is feeling like you're good at your job, but also having the ability to grow your skill on a regular basis. So feeling like you're growing at work is absolutely essential. A second key psychological need is the need for relatedness. So feeling like you're valued, appreciated, respected, feeling like you get along with your team and that they find you to someone who's helpful and valuable, bringing value to the team. The third is the need for autonomy. So feeling like the work you're doing is your choice rather than just being told what to do. And so when you have experiences that fulfill your psychological needs, you tend to be healthier, happier, and more productive. How we fuel those needs is going to differ depending on each organization. But, so just some simple things that can help people feel more, we could choose mastery. Mastery is all about feeling like the experience of growth. So one of the strategies I often tell people to consider is to invite the people on their team to choose a podcast that is industry relevant that they're going to monitor for the rest of their team. And so you can make this into a fun activity where everyone is selecting one podcast they're going to monitor. And then once a month, you guys all get together, maybe it's over pizza, and you go around the room and everyone mentions one thing that they learned listening to their favorite podcast. And it's just a great way of creating a culture of growth and one that enables people to feel like they're consistently bringing new ideas to the table. So they're both being helpful to their teammates and also growing their skills.
I love that idea, but I already told you I was a dork.
You just listen to all the podcasts?
I listen to all the podcasts. So I love that. But I have to tell you too, a confession. I actually do this with my friends. It is fun, I swear, but we have PowerPoint nights where they have made some PowerPoint presentation about whatever they're passionate about, and we all have wine and snacks and hang out, and they tell us about this thing. It could be Taylor Swift lyrics or whatever the thing is, and our entire friend group loves it. That's incredible. All look forward to it and are like, Chelsea, when's PowerPoint night?
Wow.
So I know, big nerds, but
no, I think that's great. It
right?
sounds like you've got some ambitious friends.
Well, just to hear from other people things that they're passionate about and things they love, I think there's something to that at work too, right? To get to know each other and to understand, the people that you're working with every day, you probably spend more time with them than you do with your family, unfortunately. Yep. And if you don't know them, which is, I think, part of what you're referring to in that relatedness, that, it's really important to know them and know what they love, what they're passionate about. Yeah. Is that true?
Absolutely. And to your point about PowerPoint, I actually will say I think there's a need for more structured conversations with our friends and family than we think about. And what ends up happening at a lot of family meals is just like it's the same conversation over and over again. Yeah. But when you bring structure to it, you really do get to learn about your family. And I mentioned that because your PowerPoint reminded me of recently we went on vacation with our family. So it was my immediate family, my wife and our 2 kids, and also her parents, my parents, and then her brother and his family. And so we tried to bring some structure to the conversation over dinner. And what we did was we asked everyone, actually it was the grandparents, put the spotlight on them so that the grandkids could learn from the grandparents. And we asked them, what was the best decision you ever made in your life and why? And what was the worst decision you ever made in your life and why? It was probably the most memorable part of the entire vacation was that conversation.
Love that so much. I love to learn about people and love to learn in general, but I think that's just a great way to get to know people. And these are your family members that you should know a ton about, right? Or you would think you do, but we don't always have those deeper conversations. So what are some of the things you would recommend for at work? Because I know when I think of relatedness or getting to know my coworkers, I'm like, don't make me do a trust fall. I'm not doing a ropes course. I feel like these kind of old, silly things, or not silly, but things we used to have to do. I called them forced fun. Yeah. So how do you recommend us doing something that helps that isn't forced fun?
Well, one of the examples that I often give in my keynotes is when you're introducing a new member to the team, don't just introduce them by their professional experiences, but also interview them about what they like to do during their off hours and introduce them by their personal interests. And what that does is it allows people to find commonalities that they have with new team members, and it makes them feel like a real person as opposed to just a resume.
Yes.
And so just simply knowing what you have in common with other people can create a far better connection within the members of your team. And so one of the things that you can do over the long term is obviously we talked about introducing a new team member, but you can also save everyone's interviews and then create kind of a booklet so that in addition to just being introduced by your interest, you then have access to everyone else's interest. And if you're a smart leader, what you're doing is you're thinking about this as you're doing the interview and then sharing it with the new team member and saying, you know what, you might want to talk to Brenda about this and you might want to talk to Alan about that. You guys have that in common. So now you're creating those connections in a way that feels a lot more natural than, as you said, doing some more trust falls.
Yeah, I love that idea of being a connector of people. I think that's so valuable. So we talked a little bit about how to have the relatedness. We talked a bit about mastery. Talk to me a little bit about what my first steps would be for autonomy. If I really want to take on this part of the third thing, the recipe for the great cake, how do I do that, or what should I do first?
Yeah, so autonomy is all about the experience of choice. Okay. So feeling like you have the ability to have some say in how you do your job. And so it's all about the way that a leader communicates. So one example of a way in which a leader can communicate to foster autonomy is to identify when they're introducing a new project, say, here's what we're looking to achieve, and ask people on the team to come up with the process. And so when people feel like they have contributed to the plan, they're going to take ownership of it because it was literally their idea.
Yeah.
And so what you shouldn't do is come in and say, here's what I need you to do, here's when I need you to do it, here's how I need you to do it, because that's micromanagement, and that ends up costing more people than leaders realize, because often what happens is you don't realize what it is that you did that led to the person leaving, because you have to rewind the tape 6 months prior, because that's how long it took people to find a new job.
Yeah.
And so micromanagement and a lack of autonomy ends up killing a lot of employee-employer relationships. And so if you can learn how to communicate in a way that fosters people's experience of autonomy, they're going to feel not just more invested in the work, they'll do a better job for you.
So I'm curious what you think about this. One of the things that I've seen is as we have more work from home and work situations, it seems like we're almost seeing a backlash where it's more leaning towards micromanagement out of, I think, fear of not knowing what's going on. You can't just walk by the office and see if they're on social media or what they're doing. Right. And so I've seen a lot of leaders kind of revert to, I'm really gonna force a lot of KPIs, or really have a ton of measurements of how they're doing or how they're spending their time. What do you say, or what would you say for the remedy of that, or to give them some advice on what to do to not make that make it be an issue?
Well, I think it is reflective of a lack of understanding of what we're optimizing for.
Yeah.
So when you don't know what product, if you don't know how to define productivity, it makes it really hard to find it, especially when you've been reliant all your career of just being able to look at people. So I do think there's value in having KPIs and getting clear on what the process is, and here's how we're going to measure your performance. It's when we don't have that clarity and we have our manager hovering over us that we feel controlled, and that is what's backfiring. And so what I would say as leader is you really want to identify how you're going to measure productivity, and then clarify it for people so that there's no question about what success looks like. And so what that does is it gives people clarity of mission, but it also prevents them from spinning their wheels, making it look like they're working. We see examples of this all the time with people sending emails after hours in order to make it look like they're working late.
Yeah.
I remember back when I was working in office settings, people would leave their jacket on their chair to look like they were at the office, but they weren't really.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of examples of people kind of making it look like they're working. It's performative instead of actually doing their jobs. The other thing I would say is for those of us who are experiencing micromanagement, one of the things that it's important to keep in mind is that when someone is micromanaging you, they're probably doing it out of fear. And so the way to get out of being micromanaged is to flood that person with a lot of information.
Yes.
Because then they feel like they're in control of what's happening and they'll get off your back.
Yeah, that's such a great thing, a good reminder to manage up, right? And tell more, here's what I'm doing, here's how I'm doing it, here's where we are in this project. And I just think that when people feel that there's a lack of knowledge of what someone's doing, especially if it's an employee that you manage, you do get concerned, right? And that's natural, but it's something we have to move away from now that we're in a new environment and things have changed a lot. Well, I know one of the things I really loved learning about too was that idea of how to, make sure that people are leading by example. So your leaders have to exercise or take rest or take their vacations in order for their employees to feel safe enough to follow in their lead. Tell me a little bit more about that, like how, as a leader, what do you advise? What do you think that they should be doing?
Well, so it's interesting because basically what it comes down to is that as humans, we learn by imitation.
Yeah.
And it's the people who are higher status that get looked at the most. And so their behavior is the most contagious.
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking about what you want your organization to look like, you have to factor in what your behaviors are doing to reflect some of those values. So I've been in organizations where the CEO would tell everyone that they really valued work-life balance. But then when it came down to weekly staff meetings, the people who were being celebrated and acknowledged were the people who worked around the clock for their efforts and their sacrifices, which granted makes a lot of sense, but obviously that undercuts everything else that they've said about work-life balance. And so when you think about the values you want your organization to represent, you also have to think about how your behaviors factor in. So one example that I talk about in my keynotes is having leaders who model the use of exercise as a means of maintaining their health, because when people are healthier, they also are smarter at work. So exercise really should be viewed as part of your job because of all of the benefits that it yields for performance at work. It keeps you more focused, makes you less distractible, gives you better memory, puts you in a good mood so you're connecting with others more effectively. So exercise really isn't something that we do selfishly for ourselves. Really, it's something that helps enable us to perform at our best. And so what a lot of companies do is they give people access to a gym and then it lays fallow. No one uses it because there's a stigma associated with working out in the middle of the day. But unless you have the leaders modeling the right behaviors, it's just not going to take. And so anyone listening to this who's a leader really needs to think about, what is it that I can model for my team that can help elevate their performance? And at the same time, what is it that I'm doing that might be undermining some of the values that I'm preaching?
Yeah, I think that's so important. I can remember many years ago in my career working for a fantastic leader, but I remember thinking that the expectation was that you work all the time no matter what, and that's how to be a good leader, because that was what was being modeled for me. The joke was that as this leader was getting wheeled into surgery, that someone had to go take their phone from them so that they would stop sending the emails, as they went down the hallway. And I thought, man, that's what I should do to be, a great leader. And now I know that the research obviously says no, that is the exact opposite of what you should do to be a great leader. You've got to take care of yourself. And really, as selfish as it can seem in this world where we have so little time, it feels, the more you take care of yourself and your health and all of that, the better you are for everyone around you, your team, your company, your environment. It seems like it really makes a big difference.
It does. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there are only so many good hours over the course of the day.
Yeah.
And so when you begin tracking your time, if you've ever done this, what you can see is that sadly, there's like 5 or 6 really good productive hours, and everything else is just like filler.
Yeah.
And once you're clear on when you're at your best, when your energy levels are at their highest, you can plan accordingly. And one of the things that I think people who work around the clock don't factor in is that the more they work, the worse their decisions become. And so now you're actually creating work for yourself and costing yourself time. And so the way that I view it is not, hey, let's all work 5-hour days or three-day weeks, because that'll make us more productive. I'm not sure it will, but I think that we need to think about it from the perspective of how do we get the most from ourselves in a way that doesn't burn us out.
Yeah.
And that's the path, is figuring out when you're at your best, working those hours, and then utilizing the hours when your energy is a little bit lower for things that don't require as much of you.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. I know I saw a huge difference just personally when a few years ago I decided I was really going to focus on getting enough sleep at night. Everybody was talking about, I'll sleep when I'm dead. You don't need sleep, it's fine. Do more. And it was the really height, it felt like, of the hustle culture taking over. And I'm like, I think sleep actually is good. And so I tried to really figure that out and prioritize it. And then one day I was at work and I thought, my goodness, I've done more today than I feel like I've gotten done with clarity and, able to really get things done in an efficient manner in this day than in 3 months of work before, when I was getting such little sleep. It was really impactful. So it makes a big difference.
It absolutely does. Yeah. And I'll say 2 things about that. One is I teach a course called the Peak Performance Formula, and sleep is the first lesson.
Look at that. I didn't even know.
Yeah, because unless you're sleeping well, you're not going to be doing anything well.
No, yeah.
And the second thing is, just as important as sleep, and this is probably not something that listeners are not necessarily going to love, but napping is actually remarkably effective.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about like hour and a half dozing off in the middle of the day, just 20 minutes to just close your eyes. The way I think about it is that it's almost like if you think about your computer and you've got all these windows open, and after a while, the performance of your computer degrades. And napping, it kind of resets everything, where it's almost like you can almost experience these thoughts that you had at 9 a.m. that are coming back to you when you're napping, because you didn't know it, but implicitly in the back of your mind, you were still thinking about that conversation. Yeah. And it's like closing out those windows, and then you almost have a second full day when you wake up.
Listen, I'm all for it. So you heard it here first. Everybody, take a nap and it'll be better. I know I learned from a good friend of mine who's Italian about the espresso nap. I don't know if you've ever heard this. It made me laugh. But he would tell me, drink an espresso, take a 20-minute nap, and you'll wake up and then you'll be great, the rest of the day. And so it does work. It's a great thing. I don't nap at work, just FYI, but it really does work. It makes you feel refreshed and it helps you reset. Well, thank you so much for all of this valuable insight. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it, and I know our listeners will as well.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.